Hi, this is Susan from Susan B. Cards. If you're like me, you have a box of backgrounds that you haven't used yet. Maybe they were colors you didn't really like or experiments that didn't quite go the way you wanted them to. I have these old color burst powdered watercolors, and you sprinkle them on a piece of paper and then mist it with water or use a paintbrush and you move the watercolor around. As you can see here, I probably used too much of the powder or too much water. It didn't really look great, so I threw it in a box with a bunch of other backgrounds I haven't used, thinking that maybe I'd die cut it later. I recently saw an alt-new YouTube short where the designer completely inked up a background and then embossed it with the back of an embossing folder and then ran a black ink pad over the raised areas. So if you use the back of the embossing folder rather than the front, you'll end up with a panel that has a black background and the color gets trapped in the recessed areas. Rather than inking up new panels, I thought about that box of not so great ones I had. This one started out very much like this, and I used the Simon Says stamp Twining Berries embossing folder. I put the colored side of the panel into the embossing folder so the back of the folder, or the side where the leaves are raised, face the colored side of the panel. This is opposite of how I usually use a folder. So when it's embossed, the leaves are debossed or recessed and the background is popped up. Then when you rub the black ink pad over it, the background turns black and the leaves keep their color. I added an additional step. I covered the entire thing with clear embossing powder and heated it so that it shines. I thought it looked so pretty, like a ceramic tile. The only thing I didn't really like was that some of the areas are too dark because I used some of the dark purple color burst, and after you put the black ink pad over it, it blends into the background. So it's better to keep that in mind and use lighter colors when making these backgrounds. I'm going to use a Spellbinders embossing folder. I'm putting the panel in so that the side with the raised leaves will face the colored panel. And then I'm going to run it through the Big Shot. So you can see the back side is the side that's raised, and you can't really see it, but the front of this, the inked panel, is recessed now in the areas where the leaves are. So I'm going to take this black Soot Distress Oxide pad and rub it over. And this is really hitting the raised areas. You really have to rub it in a couple different directions. See how this comes out. This area in the middle is a circle, and that area is probably the toughest part about this to get inked. So you can see it a little bit better now. And again, this area here, this was a dark purple, so it's hard to see those leaves. If I had worked quickly, I probably could have immediately poured the clear embossing powder over the panel, but instead I let it dry, and now I'm just pulling the Versamark Watermark ink pad over the entire panel so that I can attach the clear embossing powder. You should note that the ink did get onto my Versamark ink pad, and I'll probably have to get one for light colored panels. So now I'm just putting some of the clear embossing powder over the Versamark ink, and I'm trying just to cover the entire thing, but it's fine if it doesn't completely cover it, and there's some areas where it's a little bit uneven. I think it kind of makes it look more like tile. I sped up this part because it's just the melting of the embossing powder. So once again, I'm taking what's normally the back of the embossing folder, the bumpy raised side. And I am going to put this panel into the folder and run it through my machine, and I will show you the result in a minute. So here's the result. The raised area is the back of the paper, and the leaves are recessed on the colored side. I'm going to try this Archival ink this time, see how this works. Not bad. A couple areas it didn't hit. Not bad. I ended up liking the Archival ink that I used on this card better than the Distress Oxide ink that I used on the first card. And I think that's just because this looks a little bit darker and it makes the colors pop. The other thing that you can see on this card is that some of the edges around the leaves are very dark, and then in the background you can still see the color. It's not completely blacked out, and I think that adds a lot of interest to this card. A tip I want to give you about heat embossing an entire panel is that it's better to start with a heat gun from the back of the panel. That way you could properly heat up your heat gun, and it will start to melt some of that powder and keep it in place. If you start from the front, you run the risk of blowing that powder around, and that gets everywhere, and it's very hard to clean up. You don't have to use the watercolor powders that I used on the first two cards. Here I'm inking up a panel using some Distress ink and spray stains. I smooshed some of the ink onto a craft mat and dipped my paper into it and dried in between the layers. I just went ahead and embossed the panel as I did the first two cards, and then I rubbed the Archival ink over the top since I think that this looks the best. Try to use whatever you have. I use the Archival ink, but I'm sure you can use any number of black ink pads. On this panel, I decided not to blacken the entire center. So I left the color there because I thought it looked kind of nice. Here I'm just heat embossing the panel again, starting from the back and going to the front. I took some backgrounds from my background box and die cut some leaves and flowers and attached those to the cards. You can see the completed cards in the photographs at the end of the video. If you're interested in any of the products I used today, they're linked in the description under the video. Using those links really helps me out a lot. If you like this video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.